The London and North Western Railway 380 class, not to be confused with the modern Class 380 electric multiple unit, was a large 084 tank engine dating back to the 1920s. In December 2020, 69 years after the last of these engines was withdrawn from service, Caledonia Works brought the 380 class to Train Simulator, where she complements the selection of LNWR locomotive packs that CW have subsequently made. As always, this video is not sponsored by the developer. Besides the LNWR 380 class, only one other locomotive design ever had the 084 wheel arrangement, namely the Great Central Railway 8H class, later redesignated as the LNWR S1 class. Not to be confused with this S1 from the Pennsylvania Railroad, of course. Thinking back to the 380, 30 examples of this class were built, and despite being designed under the LNWR, they weren't built until just after the grouping of 1923. The 380 was based on the 1185 class 082 tank of 1911, with both classes looking like tank engine versions of the G2 class 080, otherwise known as the Super D. Despite the LNWR no longer existing as an independent company, the first 13 members of this class were still given LNWR numbers and painted in the iconic Blackberry black livery, albeit with LMS lettering on the water tanks. As for why they started out with LNWR numbers, it's because the London, Midland and Scottish Railway hadn't yet finalised their numbering system when the 380s first came on the scene. The remaining 17 members of the class were numbered from 7943 to 7959 right from the start, and their older classmates were renumbered as 7930 to 7942 between 1926 and 1928. The class was given a power rating of 5F by the LMS. Not unreasonable for a tank engine, if you ask me. Although they were intended for freight service, the 380s were also perfectly capable of taking passenger trains from time to time, and could be seen in various places throughout North Wales, as well as the Manchester to Buxton line. But they did have issues with leaking water tanks and straightening curves in the track, the latter being a result of their long wheelbase. In the grand scheme of things, the 380 class didn't have an especially long service life, as withdrawals began in 1944, only 21 years after the class first entered service. 14 of these engines survived into British Railways ownership, and were allocated numbers in the 47930 to 47959 range, but only 2 of them ever actually carried their BR numbers, namely 47931 and 47937. 47931 was the only member of her class to carry a BR crest, but didn't last long in this guise as she was withdrawn in 1951. Sadly, none of these imposing locomotives have survived into preservation. As stated previously, the LNWR 380 class was released for TS Classic in December 2020. At the time of this video's production, in late January 2025, the pack is still available to purchase from CW's website for £15, or around $32.69 NZD. As for what you get in the pack, we'll start off with the liveries, which are as follows. LNWR/LMS Blackberry Black, with 3 or 4 digit number plates. LMS pre-1928 Crimson Lake. LMS pre-1928 Unlined Black, in either code C2 or code C3 variants. LMS post-1928 Unlined Black. LMS/BR Transitional, and British Railways Black, with the early crest. This locomotive uses the Locomotion 1.4 scripting by SimNation, and her list of features is very similar to the Greater Britain Class 2222, the subject of a previous review. The features include, but are not limited to, numerous cab camera views, a fully functional cab, 3D number plates for the LNWR/LMS variant, animated joy valve gear inside the frames, although you can barely see it, animated brake rigging, although the animation is very subtle, dynamic smoke particles, fire intensity synchronized with the exhaust beat, and, as always, Performance Mode Pro. Most of the locomotives in CW's range have sound assets that were not recorded from their real-life counterparts, and the LNWR 380 class is no exception. This isn't because any of the people involved with development were lazy, but rather, the simple fact that most of these classes no longer exist in real life, or there are no preserved examples in working order. Case in point, the Highland Railway Jones Goods 460. This means that the developers sometimes have no choice but to use sounds from a different locomotive. In the case of the 380 class, the manual doesn't say exactly what engine the sounds were recorded from. I'm guessing it's the preserved LNWR coal tank number 1054, but I could be completely wrong. As is often the case with CW products released over the last 5 years, the 380 class has an advanced boiler heating system, meaning that she'll need to sit idle for a few minutes to build up the fire before setting off. According to the manual, it's best to keep the fire mass between 800 and 900 pounds, as marked on the F5 heads-up display, the equivalent on the F4 HUD being between 50 and 65%. The water level should be kept between 70% and 90%, and more details on how to drive this locomotive can be found in the manual. During tests on the ancient test track route, I remember getting this locomotive up to at least 54 miles per hour, which is faster than I was expecting. The 380 class doesn't come with any scenarios, but she does have quick-drive consists. I suggest looking at this locomotive's listing on CW's website for details on the quick-drive requirements, because there are too many for me to list off in this video. On the whole, I think CW's rendition of the LNWR 380 class is pretty good. She's more powerful than I was expecting, and has proven ideal for both passenger and freight services, but not the top-link express trains, mind. The only downsides I've noticed are A, the chuff sounds being out of sync with the wheel rotation at speed, and B, the lack of a cab camera position on the left-hand side looking down at the valve gear. You only get that camera position on the right-hand side. And there you have it, my 2 cents on the London and North Western Railway 380 class 084. Seeing as she's pretty much just a tank engine version of the Super D, the 380 could serve as an easier to drive alternative for people who like the aforementioned 080, developed by Mesh Tools, but are not so good with the really advanced locomotives. In my case, I bought the 380 add-on because I was interested in the design, and I'm a bit partial to the more obscure locomotives in general. I give the big 084 tank engine an oddly specific 7.551 out of 10.